Hello and welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to be here today. Sabah al-khair. Okay, it's a pleasure to have all of you today in this panel. And of course, we are going to deep dive into a topic, a very critical topic, which is beyond SOC, adapting ISO 27K to the next gen cyber threats. Of course, I'm honored to moderate the session. Since we are talking about how to and explore how we can evolve different approaches in integrating a framework in order to evolve the next generation cyber threats. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ahmed Afifi. I'm a cybersecurity GRC manager at Spark Engineering Consultants. Let me introduce my esteemed panelist. Let me start with Mr. Christian Boeck. He is a managing consultant at Synergit.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. So I'm a bit outside of the box over here. I'm more over operational resilience, business continuity, that kind of stuff. So I will bring all the annoying topics and questions to this session, which are just on the gray zone of the ISO 27000 and the gray zone of all of the cyber security, etc., etc. And I will leave all the specialized topics to my two co-panelists here.
Great. Thanks, Christian. My second esteemed panelist is Ms. Shayvard Asvar. She is a privacy analyst at Capital Technology.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Shayvard. I work for Capital Technologies. Again, to echo Christian, my background is not as much in the world of tech as it is in the world of privacy and processing personal information. So I work really closely with technological experts on the safeguarding measures around processing of personal information, especially as nowadays we have a lot of machine learning in our upcoming programs and services. We can touch more on that later.
Thanks. My third panelist is Mr. Alex Caroll. He is a compliance consulting manager. Mr. Alex, can you give us some insight regarding your experience, please?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Alex Caroll, I work for Tech GDPR, a small consulting company in Berlin, Germany. I'm a compliance person, so I look at how companies use or misuse frameworks to serve their product development. So information security management, a lot of GDPR consulting, and more, as you can imagine, AI governance.
Great. Let me start with the first question. Christian, can you talk about, from your insights actually, what is the next generation cyber threats?
Okay, one of the very common, and it will not surprise you, the new threat is AI. It's part of the problem, it's part of the solution, but definitely you will have all the deepfake, all the intelligent or sophisticated phishing campaigns which are supported by AI. So definitely AI is a part of the game in here. And I don't know if any of you have more experience or more return from the field on experiences with AI being the bad guy here.
Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, on a high level, I definitely agree. AI is offering a lot of opportunities for companies to have more insights into the traffic, into cyber threats, definitely. But it's bringing a lot of challenges. For instance, AI-generated ransomware attacks, where people's credentials and voices are going to be used. For instance, receiving a phone call that sounds like your boss or your wife, in order for you to yield your credentials. That's the sort of thing that we're facing. So AI is a tool, but it's going to be misused, as most tools are in the end. So something to look out for. I had a conversation a moment ago where a consultant in the room. I don't know if he's here now, but he was indicating that his clients are more often than not buying compliance questionnaires and then feeding them to ChatGPT to sort of adapt them to the company needs, and sort of brushing the problem under the carpet, thinking it's managed, I've worked on it, and I'm compliant. And that's exactly the problem here. Is non-compliance begins with lack of ownership, and I think AI is just going to make that a much more tangible issue.
Mr. Shayvard?
Yeah, and to follow up on that, because I don't need to say this to a room full of tech people, but you know, AI is, there's two categories if you're going to really summarize it. There is AIA, which is algorithmic AI, and then there is Gen AI, which is generative. So the algorithmic is what you would think of typically as AI, which is gathers information, makes a decision, and then generative, it makes up, it creates, based on the input, it creates an output. It doesn't just gather information, it creates. So going back to what Alex was saying, not just there's a lot of privacy implications, because now you have machine learning making decisions for humans, and that's where I think we need to really ensure there's a human oversight of these decisions. But the Gen AI is now, there's a new terminology, can also make up what they call AI hallucinations. So in Canada, there was a case in BC specifically where it was a criminal case in a criminal court, and the lawyer used ChatGPT to write a report. And it was discovered later that this report had made up facts, had made references to cases that didn't exist. And it was so convincing that unless you were an expert in the law and knew every clause that there is in any precedent case, you wouldn't have known, because it was so convincing in that way. So yeah, future of AI, generative AI has its benefits, but I tell my partner, because he also uses ChatGPT, I said verify anything that comes out of it, because a lot of times it can sound so confident and convincing, but it's all made up facts.
Yeah. Okay. We are talking about threats actually and the challenge. What is the solution for your opinion? Let me start with you, Shayvard. Yeah.
So for me, as I mentioned, I think human oversight is big. So right now in a lot of programs, there's machine learning involved. And I do know a lot of softwares that use personal information. So that's what I can speak on based on my background. The biggest thing is every company should have a regulation or policy based on my knowledge. And first of all, whoever has their information there, they should have a right to access it, to see what their personal information is that is being used. They should have a right to want to correct it or take it back if they don't want to. They should know the reasoning behind the decision that was being made, and there should be an authorized human oversight. So there should be personnel that are trained. There's regulated access monitoring. There's trained staff that are going to overlook this information on a no basis, and then determine why that decision was made, and then correct it if need be. So for me, yes, AI is good, is efficient, but human oversight is a must. It should help in making a decision, but it should not be the decision maker.
Yes, sure. I think, Shayvard, you are talking about the solution from the privacy point of view. Can I have your opinion, Christian?
I'm a bit, I'm fully with Shayvard here. I read 2 days ago a very interesting article about how you train your AI, actually. And the problem comes when you don't know where your data that you feed to your AI are coming from. If it's personal information and you know that's from people that give their consent, maybe this is a constraint for you, but this is also bringing added value to the data you feed it into your AI, because else, with all the data which are generated with AI themselves, you're feeding AI with data coming from AI. And it's a bit like making a copy from a copy from a copy from a copy. At the end, the quality decreases very fast, and you get crap results and crap decision from your AI as well. So the regulation on some hand can be slowing you down, But on the other hand, it also provides you some insurance that the data that you are using is quality data and that the result will get well-trained AI for you.
Alex?
Yeah, good point. Shit in, shit out, right? It's a question of data governance, making sure that you know where your data is coming from. From a privacy perspective, Shayvard will agree, it's a question of whether or not you have rights that data. We're all aware of intellectual property issues with AI, but there's a lot happening with privacy issues. And I'll say this because it's something that comes up in all the discussions I have, specifically with US clients, non-EU clients. There's a belief that data that's posted online, otherwise known under the GDPR as publicly available information, is up for grabs. Companies have the feeling that if information is online, for instance, my LinkedIn profile, I put it there with the aim of being contacted, so companies can harvest that, maybe sell it to one another. But ethically, there's a big issue here, and lawfully, I should be aware that this data is being used for those purposes, right? And like, put yourself in my shoes. Put yourself as an owner of that data. I wouldn't say the company is an owner, but the individual whose data belongs to is the owner, should have a say as to whether or not that data is being used for those purposes. Yesterday, I was at a big data conference in Amsterdam, trade show, and there was an interesting talk where it was estimated that for training purposes, all available information on internet would be harvested by the end of 2026, meaning that now the next mine to dig into is corporate data. So opening up data so that you can provide it to other companies, even those training models, is the next challenge. And I don't think companies are anywhere close to understanding how to anonymize data. They simply believe that all you need to do is remove identifiers that makes a data set anonymous. They usually refer to that as de-anonymized or de-identified information. But then there's the privacy-enhancing technologies like differential privacy. It gets complicated, it gets mathematical, but you can achieve training data or using training data that no longer enables whoever's manipulating it to identify a person. And this is where it becomes close to anonymous. So I really want to stress the fact that what's available online does not mean it's up for grabs. And the next challenge is now finding quality data to train models that would not lead to hallucinations. In fact, the threat there, the cyber threat there, is data injection into training data.
Yes, great. Thanks, Alex. We are still talking about the next generation cyber threats. I want to move to another area. What about the cloud-based services solutions? What is the challenges actually you can see? Before starting this panel, we are talking about the issue that occurred with CrowdStrike, the incident that actually have a massive impact. I think, Christian, you have a great insight around that. Can you share it with us?
What do you see today is we all are using clouds, and the number of cloud providers is very limited. So we are all either on Amazon, Google, Azure, and maybe some more local providers. But from one geography, if you exclude all the very small players because you don't trust or you don't want to go with a service which is geographically limited, so you have maybe 5 to 10 players you will consider. The question is, do you really want to be one amongst 1 million of customers served by Microsoft, Google, Amazon, what happens on the day, for example, CrowdStrike happens? Meaning it's not only you, but there are millions of customers which are affected at the same time. And on the other hand, the cloud hasn't kept its promises to be cheaper and more flexible and more customer-friendly than what was sold in the beginning. So what you see now is a lot of customers considering, a lot of enterprises considering, I'm going to the cloud, but is that really the good strategy for me? And you see like a clock going one way and coming back. You see now a lot of companies which initiate projects to go away from the cloud and to reintroduce the old way data centers, cooling, power servers, which are their own, and they develop their own private cloud solutions. Maybe not for 100%, but definitely the cloud for all and for everything is over. And now companies really think about hybrid solutions in here.
Okay, I can share a small insight regarding that, reference to our discussion before the panel. We are talking about a solution for that. Another solution is mainly rely on tampering, patching and signature updates, something like that. But we found it is challenging, and the operation is actually there is no sufficient operation model for that right now. But I think, Christian, you have another approach from the business continuity perspective, which is operating as a critical service from many sites, from many cloud service providers, which avoid having all sites down at the same time. Thanks, Christian.
Yes, it's either going to multi-cloud approach or having the hybrid approach, having some application and services delivered from multiple or to one of your location, private cloud, and then having kind of a backup or replication or copy into the cloud. It will help somehow because you may expect that patching and deployment of new releases won't happen on the same moment, on the same day, on the same period of time if you are mixing within Amazon, for example, and Azure. It's all for you to decide, do you want to have the safety and kind of insurance that you will keep in business, or do you want to keep the cost constraint and then to keep with the one single cloud provider approach? Is up to you.
Great. I think Alex has an insight.
Yeah, no, just to round up, I think you're absolutely right there. The landscape has changed dramatically in 10, 15 years. Everybody's, as we stated earlier, everybody's moved to the cloud because it's scalable. You don't have to have necessarily skilled personnel to run these applications, manage APIs. It can actually take place with microservices. So it's super convenient, but now we're reaching a point where we're in a bit of a dead end, single point of failure. Now, of course, when you're signing up a big vendor like AWS, you have pretty convincing SLAs, right? Your system can be up and running in no time if it crashes. I think it's like
theoretically, yes.
99.999 uptime. And this is super convincing, right? Procurement teams will definitely want that sort of indication and credential from the vendor. But what happens if that vendor changes their terms and conditions? We're seeing this happening every single day with every major provider. Just recently, yesterday, I read about PayPal just now under the carpet, under the table, passing, rolling out the use of your personal data to train its algorithms or even sell it as a broker. So this, apparently it's not yet the case in Europe, but in North America, it definitely something you want to look at if you're using PayPal. But we're seeing this, every major cloud-based provider has the ability to change their terms and conditions. And you either go with it or you drop them. And of course, it's a question of how much time have you invested in hooking up your stack so that it works on that system. Can you pull out easily? Probably not. So you're stuck with and I'm talking from a GDPR perspective, right? The GDPR sees two types of organizations: data controllers who are responsible for the data, processors who process on behalf of controllers. And when the processors change the game, obviously they're in violation of their data processing agreements. But usually there's not much you can do apart from dropping the system, which is a costly strategy. So again, single point of failure is not necessarily from a perspective of security, it's also from a perspective of governance and ownership of your data as a data controller, as a responsible entity, responsible party with relation to employee data, customer data, end user data if you're working in a B2B2C space.
Thanks, Alex. I need to take this moment and ask Shayvard a question regarding the same topic. And actually, I need you to elaborate more regarding the next generation threats related to laws and regulations.
I will, but before that, I do want to kind of elaborate and bridge the point that both Alex and Christian made. Because in regards to clouds, yes, it's convenient, and as Christian said, it's now better sometimes, to have your own private. The risk with both, however, and I say this because anytime I ask a client, usually it's unknown to them, the factor as well, where I say, what is your retention policy? So no matter what kind of a cloud you have, the data that you put in there, is there a retention policy? Like, are you talking about how long am I holding on to this data? And what is my disposition? When am I getting rid of it? What is that method? Because the longer, usually once the data is processed, is out of sight, out of mind. What a lot of companies don't realize is that the data is retained on the cloud there, and the longer it stays there, the longer the risk of exposure or risk of compromise over time. So no matter what kind of cloud base you're working with, always ask yourself, what is the retention data on this data that I'm processing? Especially if, again, my soft spot is personal information, but no matter what, if this personal information is even more important, that you have a retention and a disposition kind of a policy around that.
Okay, the question is to you again. How can regulation support in that?
Yeah, so for regulations, you always have to ask yourself questions around accountability. Because a lot of times, and I know a lot of companies, a lot of services, we are now working with third-party vendors. And that's when accountability is even more important, because no matter how many vendors you're working with in transferring and processing data, if there is a compromise, you as the company have the ownership of that data and of that compromise, even no matter how many vendors you're working with. So you always have to make sure, as you're working with other vendors or even internally, to look at who has access monitoring to this information. Are they trained staff? Again, like I said, what is the retention policy like? What are the safeguarding measures in terms of information integrity, availability? What are those in place? And what are the security measures? How are you getting rid of this information? Who's changing them? Who can adjust them as they change as well? Because, for example, again, going back to consumer personal information, if a consumer changes an address, who's overlooking that address change? And another thing, I'm getting too detailed as well here, but even anonymized data doesn't necessarily mean that it's secure. Because the way I look at data is, how does it go into someone's identity? So for example, if I'm the only person of color in a neighborhood that is very Dutch oriented, and you say female, then you can just point exactly who you're talking about, right? It doesn't have to be name, contact number, things that we think are obvious. So always consider this, that these pieces of information, even if it's a mask postal code, everything else around that, how does that relate to someone's identity, and how do we protect that as a company?
Great, thanks. I need to move to another part regarding the limitation of ISO 27K. What limitation you can see, Christian?
I don't know if it's a limitation, but it's a bit like all or most of the ISO standards. They tell you, okay, what should you best put in place? Usually they do not tell you how to put it in place. So it leaves the field open to all the interpretations that you may have. And with all the new regulations that are coming out and which you are using to answer by implementing, for example, ISO 27000, it's always subject, okay, did I made the right interpretation, and is the auditing body that will come to audit me later on, will that be convinced by what I will have implemented to be compliant or to be aligned with that? So ISO standard is pretty much prescriptive, but as far as I know, the ISO 27000 is still not prescriptive enough. There are a lot of topics which to us are must do, and still in the standard is mentioned as you should, you may, but no obligation from the standard perspective. So that leaves some openness to what do you want to do? And it all comes at the end. Do you want to have a nice checklist with all the boxes ticked? Or do you want to have a system which is well implemented, efficient, and that has value to your company? But I'm pretty sure, Alex, you have more information or more insight on that one as well.
No, I think you've captured it. It's not prescriptive enough. And for anybody who's read data protection law, it's worse when you start looking at the law because it's really technology agnostic. Literally, Article 32 of the GDPR says protect data to the level that's necessary. So what happens then? It's a risk-based approach, exactly like ISO norms. What do? You start looking at risks, right? And that begins with inventories. Chapter 4, context of the organization, which I was going to quote from, but it's something about the company. No, actually, I need to quote from it because the actual wording is the problem, I believe. Yeah, but I was, so thanks for that, but I was looking for the actual modal verb that's used. The organization shall determine external and internal issues, very vague, that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its information security management system. But it's making it about the ISMS, not so much about security, right? And this is the risk, is that you task somebody in the organization to focus on the ISMS, compliance, and they're going to focus on whether the system works, where it's auditable, and they get actually a good tap on the back after Chapter 9 reviews are being made. But in fact, it should be about security. Under 4.2, note, the requirements of interested parties may include legal and regulatory requirements and contractual obligations. So if you, as a CISO, have no particular inclination to look into law, and I can understand that, although the GDPR is written in plain English for a 10-year-old to read. How you implement it, absolutely right, is the question. But what you need to implement is fairly clear. Of course, you probably have no time and no inclination to look into details. So I think that is an intrinsic limitation of such a vague framework. I'm not saying it's bad. I really like it, but it's not equipping companies well enough to anticipate regulatory pressures or requirements. If you look at 2702, under identification, so 18.1.1, identification of applicable legislation and contractual requirements. Managers should identify all legislation applicable, without my glasses, a bit difficult, applicable to their organization in order to meet the requirements for their type of business. All right?
Yes, I said 2702 is a set of good recipes that you can choose or not. You choose what you want, provided that you check with Annex A, and Annex A tells you that you shall identify, etc., applicable regulation.
Yeah.
Actually, I agree.
So-
I agree with that opinion.
You shall identify and you shall decide which one you are subject or which one you have to respect.
Okay, so it's a bit clearer in the new version. Thank you both for the
In the
feedback.
old version too. I mean, in the old version, it was just the number of the control that was different.
Yeah.
It was 18.2 in Annex I.
The question is, who are you tasking within the organization to carry this out?
You have to determine this in chapter, I don't remember, 5.
5.3.
Yes, correct.
Which is top management, yes, in leadership.
Roles and
Who has to
responsibilities.
decide role and responsibility, which one is responsible for what. Yeah.
But this, if I understand well, this is all in the ISO 2702.
One.
Oh, one. Okay, my
Well, O2
apologies.
is a set of recipes.
Exactly,
I would say.
this is why I say.
27.1 is a management system. And you can, in 27.1, take the complete RGPD, etc., as measures or as controls that you want to implement. You can put sometimes also business continuity rules and regulation also. You can add what you want within the scope of the 2701.
And the question is, what is the guarantee that you're going to identify what you want? If your inventories are not properly done initially, they're not going to make it into the risk assessment of Chapter 6. They're not going to be operationalized in Chapter 8. They're not going to be reviewed in Chapter 9. They're not going to be implemented.
In this case, go back to the philosophy of 27.1. Who is a risk owner? There is somewhere a risk not to follow the rules, not to identify the good regulation. There is a risk owner that decides that he does not take this and he will occur criticism. I mean, if your management is bad, the result will be bad. 27.1 is that, exactly that. It will not force the management to be good.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I need to add one more point. I am from a third-party certification body, an Australian company. You said it's a weak standard, but we are bound by 27006 and 17021, which are the auditing standards which are mandatory. There, whether the company writes or not, we have to go and check the legal requirements. It cannot be a weak standard. Standard says we have to go and check for legal requirements.
So
It is a strong standard only.
So you're saying the complement to that is the auditing aspect? That's where the solution lies?
Yes, the auditing standards are compulsory for us. We have to check the legal requirements. Company might have forgotten to write privacy, but we have to check. And if there is a deficiency, we have to write a non-conformance.
Yeah.
It is not a weak standard.
Sorry for interrupting, but I agree. Actually, it is not definitely it is not a vague standard. I think it is for a purpose. In order, it is applicable for many industries and many entities. Nature. So the entity itself need to have it is a feature actually in order to define what is applicable controls and what's not, what is applicable in the implementation and what is not also, and definitely in the complete cycle. In the audit cycle, I mean, the auditor has the right and has the privilege to make sure that the implementation is good or have a deficit or something like that. I may agree in a certain part that Christian mentioned that I say, and of course I I'm sure that will be deployed in the nearest future. We may have a detailed implementation guidance for each control, but it is a guidance in order to not to be obligate a certain entity, and it is not its nature to have it again aligned with different industries. I think we may have a question. Yes. Okay.
I think there are some principles we have to put it on table and agree on it. Number one, all of these standards are the minimum requirements. When it comes to international standards, these are the minimum requirements.
Yes.
You don't expect from the minimum requirements to excel. This is what the countries agreed on it in the technical committees.
Yes.
Number two, these standards are voluntaries. There is no obligation to implement it. So you cannot deal with it like an contractual, or you deal with it like a legal. It's a voluntary base from the organization itself. This is the way how to implement the information security and data protection and cybersecurity. So it's up to them to implement it or not. Although there is indirect enforcement of these standards, but they are created as a voluntary. Number three, you cannot go with the standards without integrating it, at least from understanding point of view, with its guidelines. You have to go and read the guidelines. The standard give you a generic requirements where all the organization can implement it, from the very SMEs to the huge organization. However, going to the descriptive guidelines, it can give you more insights. Despite all of these 3 points, there are weaknesses. And this is why we are updating and upgrading these standards every 5 to 7 years.
Yes.
So how can, I work with international standards in the technical committees. We are creating these standards. We just now created the ISO 56001 Innovation Management System. And it is just launched 1 month back. What would be the obstacle in the future? What are the things that we need to think about it? This will come with the time. So by discussing all of these challenges, we will come to see the requirements, where we need to fit all of these controls, how to implement it, and how to integrate it.
Thanks.
So these are the principles. We have all the time to think about it.
Thanks. I think Shayvard have
Yeah, I just want to add something to that, because you're correct, but where the concern, I think, at least from my lens, lies, when you say the standard is optional, that's very true. But how do we make the language so that it shows how essential the security and the safeguarding and protection of privacy and all that is? So how do we, moving forward in our language, implement kind of a plan? No, there's challenge and should, but my point is, how do we bring forward a solution that is security and privacy designed from the get-go, so that we don't have to worry about the after facts and the auditing and the standards around the after facts? How do we? It's just a question, food for thought. Yeah, and I come from North America, where our standards PIPEDA it follows GDPR to the T. So I understand that's where it's like it's a should, is a law. But I'm saying in like moving forward, yeah.
ISO and GDPR are two different. Sorry, ISO and GDPR are two different things according to the obligation that you have. According to the ISO standards, as the gentleman already explained, it's voluntary.
Right.
When we talk about GDPR, it's not voluntary. You're obliged to do that.
That's what we were getting at, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's And another thing, actually, because I took the microphone, I'll try to go forward about one comment. When we talk about retention policy, and you mentioned retention policy,
Yeah.
there is no, we made a retention policy because we have a challenge that we want to address. But when you process the personal data, there is no challenge, there is obligation, and that's a fixed date. That's a fixed obligation according to the GDPR. That is not a policy, that's obligation directly.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
thanks. I think we have a question here.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is Khaled from Egypt. It's just 2 minutes to clarify something. When you mentioned the word may used in the clauses in ISO 27001, I just want to clarify that And this is ISO 27001. This is the standards. And about ISO 27002, it's control. You may use it or may not use it if you are, for example, if you are using cloud-based, so you use the cloud-based controls. If you are not, you will not use it.
Yeah.
And about the guidance or guides in ISO 27003. So ISO 27001 is the standards. ISO 27000 telling you what you should have. ISO 27003 telling you guidelines how you do this. ISO 27002 having the controls that you choose that you need to use it in your organization. If I just want to clarify, may is used only to mention that if you are subject to this, but it does not mean it's optional.
Exactly.
This is only what I want.
And again, it goes back to the question of who do you task within the company to figure out if it does apply. I've seen clients who process personal data without realizing it. There's a massive misconception about what personal data is. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
But having a DPO, putting money at the problem by appointing a DPO is not going to work if they don't work together. You need... Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's plenty of ways of proving that you have the right resources and competences. The question is, practically, do they work together multidisciplinarily to figure these things out? Yeah, exactly. So I completely appreciate the feedback on the complementarity of the auditing aspect, definitely.
Yes, thanks, many thanks for your participation and for your insight. Thanks, Khaled, also for clarification. I cannot agree more. Actually, that I have to recap this point. That shall actually is written that in order to not to conflict with the statement of applicability, which is defined what is applicable and what is not. Okay, do you have any other questions?
Just a little bit of clarification as well. All the points are good. From experience, it's a context of organization. First of all, there is a disconnect in many of clients we see between the technical people looking at the technical system and the business. End of the day, when we resolve is a business issue. What define, is it in privacy or no? It's a business need. So beyond this applicability, the first thing, the context of organization must be understood. And many times companies will have a third party to come to do the audit. The technical people are busy. They disconnect with the IM management. They understand exactly, they own the data and know if it's applicable to privacy or security or no. If you do an audit, watch out for this. Make sure that you talk to the right person of the organization so your assessment of the information is correct, and then flow the context organization, the GDPR, or North America, the privacy, then you're doing a good assessment. It's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. We are talking about next-gen cyber threats. The ISO 27001 has been recently updated in February this year with an additional clause in 4.1 and 4.2 regarding to climate change. So basically, I would be interested in your opinion, what the additional, next-gen cyber threats might be caused by these extra clauses in 4.1 and 4.2. So with regards to climate change.
I may try to take this one. I don't know how are those new clauses related to the new threats and AI, etc. Beside the fact that we all know that AI is consuming enormous amount of processing power that needs enormous quantities of electricity, cooling, etc., etc., etc. So to somehow this is related. But the way I interpret those two new clauses, which by the way also appeared at the same time in the ISO 22301 for business continuity, is this is a door opener to much more to come with the next revision of the standards. So, we all know climate change introduces new risks, new threats, and therefore also needs new controls and new solutions for being more resilient, for being more safe, and to prevent those risks related to climate change. So not sure how does that relate to AI directly, but indirectly, for sure, it has some relations. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
I just drop you for more because climate change is one of my hobby, passions, etc. So
yes, I'm a biologist myself, so I'm interested in that one too. And since many of you are probably aware that you are now below sea level, it should be one of the areas that people and organizations are thinking about. However, it's just one sentence in 4.1. And it's, that's a shell, I think. And the other one is a note in 4.2. And I'm really looking for things, because as a biologist, I can think of a few things. However, I would be interested in the next gen cyber threats that may cause if you are looking into climate change. And one of the things that I'm thinking of, being in the Netherlands over here, you know, 75% of the Netherlands is below sea level. And the climate change is predicting that sea level will be rising in a couple of decades with 2 to 5 meters, which will probably end up that we have wet feet over here if we do not take that into account. Basically, this is the only example that I can think of. And I would be really interested in any of your ideas. We have 100 people over here.
Yeah.
What you think, what this new climate change amendment is causing something for the next gen cyber threats.
That's a super nice input. Thanks for sharing that, because indeed we focused a lot on personal data from our areas of perspective, IT, but we tend to forget completely about OT, operational technology, and IoT, device data, and device networks. So an attacked surface would be to send the wrong information to your monitoring systems to make it look like your critical infrastructure is operating at nominal value when in fact it's not. That's really where the industrial OT threats are trying to protect against is injection of false information in the systems, because sensors and robotics depend or allow decision making that have critical implications. So, excellent input.
Thanks, Alex.
Last remark in this case, I'm more afraid of climate change jeopardizing our business continuity than AI.
Thanks, a good remark. I think we have another question here.
Yes. During the last, I would say, 5 years, I have seen some situations where climate change has an effect in the decision for business continuity, for instance. You have in 22301, you have IT managers that are thinking that to have 2 data centers active with symmetric application and so on costs too much in power, because you have twice the power. It's not twice, it's 1,8, etc. So they have, instead of having hot sites backup, they decide to downgrade it for non-critical application to a warm backup. That means you will switch you will fall over to the backup in 5 hours, 6 hours instead of a few seconds. and they accept this penalty because they save hundreds of thousands of euros also. So it has an indirect impact on the carbon footprint, this kind of stuff. I see another customer in the automobile industry that compute the carbon footprint of the IT per type of car that they produce. So the car project manager has to compute the total IT, carbon footprint, including IT, because IT is also a big part of this. I see other people changing the processors of the machine to have a more low-cost processor and low-consumption processors. Not Intel, most of the time now, etc., etc. And computing also the power usage efficiency, power usage effectiveness in the data center. Because in the data center, if you pile up 100 servers, 100 fan, 100 AC, etc. stuff, 50% of the power consumption is not for IT. It's to make fan, it's not for compute, I would say. It's to make fan run and to convert AC, DC, etc. So you have, there is a lot of work done in that subject to have data centers that are less, that have a smaller footprint, and to try to avoid footprint in backup data center, in a symmetric application, and so on. That's what I could say. But the driver is also cost. It's not only the goodwill of protection against footprint, against
yes.
CO2 and so on. It's also cost.
Yes, thank you. Any questions?
Family of 45 to 50 standards, there are two of them which are relevant for this discussion. One of them is 27017, which is all about cloud security. There are additional controls suggested. The other one is 27032, which is about cyber security. Other 20 to 30 controls. I think we should all go into the entire family of standards rather than just commenting on just 27001.
Sure.
Then we'll get it. It's definitely a very good family of standards.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
I think we have the last question here.
I'm going to ask about wearable AI. Currently, we are at the brink of Facebook pushing wearable AI, meaning like Ray-Ban glasses and such, and they are processing much more personal data, feeding into big data. And they are Meta asked EU citizens about can we use your data to train our Meta AI, and it's thankfully rejected, but currently there's a huge big data process, and they are trying to capitalize it and enforce this wearable AI technology to become the next trended thing. And I'm going to ask, currently the Clearview AI, for example, use web scraping, which use the open Google images to train their AI, which is against the GDPR. And there are so many US companies basically legitimizing or capitalizing or some commercializing these AI applications. And they are going to sell this to European Union companies. My question is when these AI applications come to Europe and they are trained to process personal data in big data of the companies here, what would mean in terms of the accountability of data processor and data controller? How can the European Union companies say that, yeah, this data processor, which is the AI application, is making data processing against our whatever policies, but can they bypass GDPR in the those kind of stuff?
Actually not. And what's likely to happen is the European Commission will ask for these systems to be geo-blocked. That was the case, for instance, in Italy a few months ago with ChatGPT. For a duration of, I think, 8 days, ChatGPT had to geo-block its service so that Italian users would not use it, simply on issues related to privacy. On the topic of Clearview AI, actually, I think 3 weeks ago, the Dutch Data Protection Authority fined them, I think, 290 million for the unlawful scraping of images for training their models. What companies fail to understand is there's nothing wrong with training models with personal data. It just needs to be done in a compliant way, and that requires transparency and user control. So if Meta is expecting or asking users to opt in rather than opting out, which would be similar to the difference between giving consent or relying on legitimate interest for that to be possible, it can be done. But one thing to consider is we talk about the GDPR quite a bit, but there's a lot of enforcement happening in the US at the same time, right? In fact, there's a enforcement mechanism from the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, that's known as algorithmic disengagement, which allows the FTC to go after a company, and if it's determined that they have trained models on data that wasn't properly collected, then they can force the organization to delete the model and delete the data, which is very, very costly. So a lot of enforcement is taking place in the US as much as in the EU. What I have seen, and I don't know if it really answers your question, but what I have seen in the last 5 to 6 years is the Federal Trade Commission in the US tends to fine companies for data breaches, whereas in the EU, fines are attributed to companies that fail to implement corrective actions and essentially that violate the GDPR. So it's a violation of articles of the GDPR, usually having to do with transparency and lawfulness, which is 5.1 in the GDPR.
Thanks, Alex. Unfortunately, I think we are run out of time. I need to use the last minutes to thank our esteemed panelists and our esteemed audience. Really, your participation and insights are more valuable. Hopefully, taking all of this discussion to our workplaces in order to strengthen our cybersecurity resilience. Thank you all again, and hopefully seeing you again. Thank you.